and said, oh, we're producing cars. Everybody needs cars. Of course, we will keep working. Everybody else has to be fired, but us, no, we'll stay at work. Then there were miners who were involved, and they said, well, everybody else must be, all these stupid guys producing cars, of course, they produce horrible cars, they have all to be fired. But the coal mines, of course, we need coal. Всегда будет нужен уголь. Forever there will be a need for coal. So these guys, of course, they have to be fired tomorrow. We don't want them to stay employed for 1 more hour. But, of course, we will keep our employment for sure. So that was the kind of debate. You know? So in that sense, it's not that people were kind of fighting back. In fact, they were embracing this kind of neoliberal policy, and including people in the working class, or people who could be technically characterized as working class. Because in fact, what was the Soviet working class was mainly a kind of atomized mass of people who were brought into factories and who really didn't have the horizontal structures of self-organization typical for the working class. They didn't have the structures of a labor movement. They didn't have many of the experiences which historically are associated with being proletarians or workers in the Marxist class sense. But more, the Soviet kind of system was organizing people from the outside, and thus letting them know experience and knowledge of self-organization. In that sense, once the state, instead of organizing them around the ideology of communism, turned into the tool of capitalist restoration, people were either left alone without any experience and knowledge of how to organize themselves, or kept following the state with the very same inertia of the Stalinist system well into this capitalist restoration, keeping the very same loyalty with the very same institutions which were now leading them into the capitalist reality. I think in a certain sense you can see the same happening now in China, but of course I don't want to go too far into parallels because I don't know China that well, but I think there is some to it. On the other hand, again, you see, in the Soviet society, the productive side and the political side was organized by the state from the outside. What was self-organized by the Soviet people was consumption. Because the Soviet state always failed consumption side. It succeeded with the production side, more or less. And, everything was organized, planned, and so on. But consumption was something which was left to the people. Like you find the goods yourself, you find the way to get access to what you need. And in that sense, Soviet society was extremely consumerist. And the only experience of actually being active socially was about getting something. That's that getting, not buying, but getting. If somebody lived in the Soviet Union or experienced some contacts with the Soviet people, you know the term get to get. It was not about buying goods, it was getting goods, because spending money was not an issue, but getting access to the actual physical goods was an issue. So in that sense, it was a very consumerist society, and the neoliberal project very much used that potential of Soviet people. So in a certain sense, Soviet society was quite well prepared to accept capitalism, including in its most savage neoliberal form. More, when the reality of capitalism became clear, and people really started feeling that things were not as good as they expected, there was resistance. There was a lot of resistance. But in what form this resistance was happening? So there were three types of resistance which emerged. One was in a way organized from above. These were mostly enterprise managers who were called krasные директора, red directors, or red managers, who were not red at all, but they were just industrial managers who were not happy with the first stage of neoliberal reform actually destroying their companies and their enterprises. But even more, they weren't happy with their neoliberal reformers not letting them into the privatization process as the major agents of this process. So they did resist privatization, but not in order to stop it, but rather in order to change the rules and get themselves a role in the process. And they did influence some of the strikes and protests, and in a way that had a tremendous demoralizing effect on the workers, because the workers were used to continue obeying their managers even when protesting. It was called директорские забастовки, directors' strikes. So strikes organized by the management, which continue the same tradition of paternalistic rule, paternalistic domination at the enterprise level. And it didn't contribute to class consciousness, of course. And the culmination of that struggle was around 1993, and after the coup d'etat of Yeltsin in September-October 1993, the situation changed. And of course we can say Yeltsin won and the other side was defeated. Ironically, in a way the other side also won. I mean, the side which was politically represented by the people in the White House were exactly these red directors. And if you follow what happened after 1993, in 1994, actually the privatization strategy changed. And the directors were involved in the process, they were included. And in that sense, it was not that Yeltsin was so successful in suppressing the opposition, but it was very much the opposition which actually achieved its goals through sending people to fight the police, getting quite a few people killed by the police, and then abandoning these very people because they served their purpose and they were not necessary anymore. So that kind of movement was simply betrayed and dropped by its leaders, but it's very much the problem of the movement itself, that the movement was following that paternalistic kind of pattern and was dependent on that kind of leadership. It's not a kind of traditional Trotskyist failure of leadership, which was always the case, but in this case it's a social problem. It's not the political leadership which failed, and actually in a way nobody failed. It was tremendously successful leadership according to its own terms. So the second type of opposition was more or less spontaneous or semi-spontaneous reaction of the low-ranking Stalinist cadre in the party, which built up a few Stalinist or semi-Stalinist groups. The biggest was the Communist Workers' Party of Russia, Russian Communist Workers' Party, RKRP, which really did represent some challenge to their privatization policy and to the system, but to the emerging system, but based on the completely misfunctional ideology and politics. And it's not only because, say, I don't like Stalinism. It's not about my taste or my views politically. It's just that these people have had a completely irrelevant, completely inadequate view of politics, which was basically, let's fight to recreate the Soviet Union, or let's fight to go back into the 1930s, or something like that. So completely utopian perspective. And only as long as there was the situation of disorientation and fragmentation, when people needed utopia, and this kind of reactionary utopia in a way, this could work. But immediately once the new system started shaping itself, and the situation started changing and creating new social relationships, these ideologies became visibly inadequate because they had no answers, not even they had debates on what to do with the current problems, how to address the new realities and new challenges. So it's like keeping saying, well, we have